Thank you, Dr. Sundquist, for your kind introduction, and thank you all for having me here. To be honest, I have gotten so used to seeing people on my screen that seeing you all in person makes me kind of nervous. But I'll try my best to share with you what the Lord has engraved in my heart lately. Psalm 63 that we just read together is a prayer of David that he wrote in the desert. As you may know, this was written when he was being chased by his own son. Though we may not have been in the same life-threatening situation as David was in, we too go through our own experiences in the desert because Christians are not guaranteed a life free of hardships. In contrast to climbing a mountain where we can actually see the top and make purposeful movements towards that visible end, walking in a desert where David was being chased can be quite challenging and less motivating, for the end is hardly ever visible. The very fact that there is no visible end can be discouraging. And in the desert, we experience fear, because out there we may not find big enough rocks that we can hide behind, or big enough trees that can provide shade. And in the desert, we may spend sleepless nights because we are deprived of the comfort of home. So out in the desert, David must have felt desolate, fearful, and restless. But in this solitary place, far away from home, as he says in verses 6 through 8, David is spending midnight hours in grateful reflection. Right in the middle of the desert where there's no water, we hear David sing in the shadow of God's wings. Right beside David, in the middle of a place of inevitable fear and anxiety, we see God who upholds David as he desperately clings to the Lord. So David is letting us know how the desert can be a place of blessing where we can draw near to God. David is teaching us that even though there may be a desert in physical surrounding, with God, there can be no desert in our hearts. And we see that David's grateful midnight hour reflection, his relieved singing in the shadow of God's wings, and his sense of security assured in the upholding hands of the Lord could come forth because he realized and confessed his thirst for God. Philip Yancey, together with his friend, co-authored a book called Gift of Pain. Having discovered that being painless is actually the root cause of the damage leprosy patients incur, they argue that pain is one of God's great gifts to us. Though pain is not something that most of us would count as a blessing, pain truly is a gift from God because it allows us to know that something is wrong. Pain is a gift that none of us wants, but none of us can go without. Thirst is a blessing because it too allows us to know that something is wrong. David, though he is physically situated in the desert of solitude, sorrow, and even death, is blessed because he feels his thirst. As a matter of fact, his whole being is thirsty after God. His body, his soul, his lips, his hands, his thoughts are in thirst for God. In this dry and parched land, David is experiencing the gift of thirst, and he knows what he is thirsty for, what he is lacking: the water, the fountain of living water. You probably remember Psalm 42, verses 1 through 2. As the deer pants for streams of water, so my soul longs for you, my God. My soul thirsts for God, the living God. I see a blessed soul here. This soul is so blessed to say, I know I'm thirsty, and I know what I am thirsty for. I am thirsty for God, the living God. Jesus therefore tells us, blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are the poor in spirit. And the word poor here signifies the kind of hunger that one experiences after going without food for 2 to 3 weeks. The word hunger here implies the kind of desperateness that a mother feels when she fails to find her child who has been missing for a long time. When my boy Andrew was a little boy, on our short visit to Korea, I took him to a mega bookstore. And I took him to the children's corner where they had charming, colorful books that my boy Andrew never saw before growing up in Kazakhstan. When I watched him happily immersed in these books, I took comfort, and I began to read some of the books that caught my attention. In a little while, when I turned my eyes to where I expected to see Andrew, he was not there. And among those of you who have kids, probably can imagine what I went through. And even if you don't, you can probably imagine losing something that is precious to you that only you have. So I started running around the big store, panicking, crying out his name, 현우야, Andrew, Androshka, in 3 languages that he could understand. Finally, I heard somebody calling out, Amma! And I knew it was him. So I followed his voice and I saw him. And when I finally saw him, I just ran to him and hugged him as tightly as I could. The poor signifies that kind of desperateness that a mom has looking for her missing child. When was the last time that you had that kind of hunger, that kind of thirst, that kind of desperateness for God? When was the last time that you panted for God as the deer pants for water? When was the last time that you sought after God as earnestly as mom looking for her missing child? Or have you ever hungered for God as someone who has gone without food for days on end? And we may now ask ourselves, why such thirst? Listen to the word of Solomon found in the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 1. What do people gain from all their labors at which they toil under the sun? Generations come and generations go, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises and the sun sets and hurries back to where it rises. The wind blows to the south and turns to the north. Round and round it goes, ever returning on its course. All streams flow into the sea, yet the sea is never full. To the place the streams come from, there they return again. Let me read verse 7 again. All streams flow into the sea, yet the sea is never full. The sea never fills up. Despite the fact that all the rivers flow into the sea day in and day out, the sea never fills up. Why is this happening? Why such futility? Why such meaninglessness? Why such thirst? Through the lips of prophet Jeremiah, we hear the reason behind such a perpetual sense of meaninglessness, the futility, the thirst, This is the word of the Lord. He says, "My people have committed two sins. They have forsaken me, the spring of living water, and have dug their own cisterns, broken cisterns that cannot hold water." The reason that the sea is never full, the reason that we suffer from never-ending thirst is because we have tried to hold water with broken cisterns, cisterns that leak, having abandoned the source of living water, the fountain of life. Do you remember the woman in the town of Sychar? She is, to me, a reminder of our state of living in unending thirst because of our sin, of walking out on God, digging cisterns that are no better than sieves. To her, Jesus comes and says, "I am thirsty." When the woman heard that, she must have been reminded of her own thirst. And when Jesus says, "If you knew the gift of God, and who it is that asks you for a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." This is how she responds, "Sir, give me that water so that I won't get thirsty again." She's blessed. She's blessed because she knows that she's thirsty, and Jesus can quench her thirst. There's one more woman who demonstrates our thirst, and that it can be quenched by Jesus. We meet her in Luke 7. She was a town harlot, and it was not a secret to anyone. When she heard that Jesus was a guest in the home of the Pharisee, she had no hesitation to go see him. Though she could foresee how people, particularly the Pharisees, would look at her and treat her, it could not stop her from going to see Jesus. Finally, she was inside the house and she saw Jesus. She was so happy to see him, and she was so happy that she came, but she could not say anything because she felt unworthy. So in silence, she simply stood at the feet of Jesus, and she wept. And she wept. When she realized that she has already rained tears on the feet of Jesus, she stooped down, let her hair down, and dried his feet with her hair. Then she took the alabaster jar that she took with her and lavishly poured it on the feet of Jesus. She was sinful. She was sinful not only in the eyes of her own eyes, but in the eyes of others. But she was desperate. And she was wise. She was wise enough not to mind the judgmental eyes of the Pharisees. She was wise enough to look beyond the immediate criticism. She was wise enough to know what to sacrifice to gain what is eternal. She was wise enough to acknowledge her thirst. She was wise enough to believe that Jesus was the one and only God who could quench her thirst and bless her with his presence. She was blessed because she was poor in spirit. What we need today, what we will need tomorrow, is a simple heart that thirsts for God, to return to God. And from that heart, revival will flow into our lives. One of the most neglected yet remarkable instructions given by our resurrected Jesus Christ to his disciples was, Go to Galilee. Why travel 120 kilometers from center Jerusalem to rural Galilee? Because Galilee was where they first met Jesus. To return to Galilee was to return to their first love, their first thirst. Over the 3 years, bad habits and wrong dreams haunted the disciples. They craved for, they longed for, they thirsted for something else than Jesus. Only when the disciples could return to Galilee, they could be given a new dream, the Great Commission. So far, we've talked about our thirst for God, our longing for God. But I have a question for you. What about God? Does God have thirst for us? Does God ever long for us? The God whom I love, the God whom I worship, yearns for us. As a matter of fact, His yearning for us is far greater than our yearning for Him. The entire Bible, therefore, is filled with God's love, God's thirst for us. I see God's thirst for us in the very first commandment that He has given us. What's the first commandment? You shall have no other gods before me. You shall have no other gods before me. God is telling us, there should be nothing between my face and your face. There should be only you right in front of my face. I like it when my husband looks at me and talks to me, when he makes eye contact with me when he talks. When he doesn't, I say, eye contact. Why do I do that? Because I don't want anything to interfere his view of me and my view of him when we talk. God desires this kind of intimacy, this kind of closeness. And such a longing of God for us is very well reflected in one of my favorite Psalms, 139. Where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I go to the heavens, you are there. If I make my bed in the depths, you are there. If I rise on the wings of the dawn, you are there. If I settle on the far side of the sea, even there your right hand upholds me. Your right hand will hold me fast. No matter where we go, and no matter when it is that we go, God is always before us, ahead of us, waiting for us. This is why Oskinis writes, we cannot find God without God. We cannot reach God without God. We cannot satisfy God without God, which is another way of saying that our seeking will always fall short unless God's grace initiates the search and unless God's call draws us to Him and completes the search. All of us have come this far because of God who blesses us with His presence. All of us could come this far and sit here and worship God together because God has let His goodness go before us. We have been able to not only walk through the desert, but out of the desert, thanks to God who has carried us as a father carries his son. Because of God's longing for us, because of God's commitment to us, we could drink water from the well that we did not dig. We could live in the city that we did not establish, and we could enjoy the fruit of the vineyard and the olive groves that we did not plant. We are here and we worship God thanks to God's longing for us that is simply beyond description. And we have to remember that there is a purpose behind God's intense longing for us. God longs for us not instead of others, but for the sake of others. That's why when Jesus called Simon and Andrew, he said, "Come and follow me. I will send you out to fish for people." You may have heard of a rabbi-student concept which birthed a Jewish saying, "May you be covered in his dust." We are all called to follow Jesus and follow him up close, so close that we will be covered in his dust, enfolded in his presence, and drenched with his longing for us that goes beyond us. In the beginning, I mentioned about David and his journey through the desert. This happened thousands of years ago. However, in many regards, there are many of us who go through the same desert today. We are living through a difficult time. So we feel helpless, hopeless, and restless. But let us remember that just as David did in the desert, we too can sing in the shadow of God's wings as we thirst for God. Let us remember that just as David did, we too can behold the power and glory of God as we hunger for God. And also, let us remember that because of God's earnest longing for us that extends beyond us, despite the current conflicts and tears, on that day, when a great multitude from every nation, tribe, and people that no one can ever count stands before the throne of God, we will sing in our own language, 구원하심이 보좌에 앉으신 하나님과 어린 양께 있도다. Спасение нашу Богу, Богу нашему, сидящему на престоле и Агнцу. Salvation belongs to our God who sits on the throne and to the Lamb. So what we are to do here today is to keep our eyes fixed on Jesus Christ, who is sovereign even here and now, and choose to trust him in his everlasting love, in his everlasting thirst for us. I would like to sing a song with you. And because this is a song that may be new to all of you, many of you, let me sing it first. And then I'll invite you to sing it with me. It's called 예 주님. And 예 주님 in Korean means yes, Lord. Lord, I believe you're working in my life. Lord, I believe you're working in my life. Lord, I believe you're sovereign here and now. Lord, I believe you're sovereign in my life. Jesus, I choose to trust you. Jesus, I choose to trust you. Jesus, I choose to trust you. 예, 주님. Jesus, I choose to trust you. Jesus, I choose to trust you. Jesus, I choose to trust you. 예, 주님. Let us slightly change the lyrics to Jesus, we believe you're working in our lives. Can we do that? Lord, we believe you're working in
our lives.
You may join us and by your Spirit.
Lord, we believe you're working in our lives. Lord, we believe you're working here and now. Lord, we believe you are sovereign in our lives. Jesus, we choose to trust you. 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 예, 주님. 예, 주님. Jesus, we choose to trust you. Jesus, we choose to trust you. Jesus, we choose to trust you. Yeah. Can we sing it one more time, Lord? Lord, we believe you're working in our lives. Lord, we believe you're working in our lives. Lord, we believe you're sovereign here and now. Lord, we believe you're sovereign in our lives. In our lives, Lord, Jesus, we choose to trust you. Jesus, we choose to trust you. Amen. Jesus, we choose to trust you. 예, 주님. 예, 주님. Jesus, we choose to trust you. Jesus, Jesus, we choose to trust you. Jesus, we choose to trust you. 예, 주님. Thank you. You may be seated.